Hey bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here to go over all of the books that I read in 2018. Before we get into the actual video, I just want to say that I am trying out this new background. I bought these pieces behind me because I thought that they would make a very cute background. I'm still trying to decide what I think about it. I don't know, I might return this light on the bottom, but let me know in the comment section what you guys think. Anyways, like I said, in today's video, I'm going to go over all of the books that I read in 2018. So I completed 52 books, I DNF'd one, and I started and paused one book. I wasn't actually planning to do this video, but I saw a few people do them, and I enjoyed watching them. So then I went to my community tab on YouTube and Instagram and Twitter. I put up polls to see if you guys were interested in a list video of all the books that I read in 2018, and I was kind of surprised at how many people said that they were interested. On top of that, in the last week or two, I got a lot of new subscribers, so if you guys are new here, hi, welcome. Thank you for subscribing. And I started thinking that doing a list of all the books that I read with my star ratings might serve as a good introduction to people, and it might give them a sense of what my reading tastes are like. So the way that I'm going to do this video is that I'm going to list all of the books that I read, and I'm going to give a star rating. I'm not going to give a synopsis because that would just take way too long, but I will give age category and genre and maybe a sentence of my overall thoughts on the book. I thought this would also be a good idea because some of these books won't be making it into any of my end of year lists that I am currently in the middle of planning. And so if there are books in this list that you're interested in, you can always check out my monthly wrap up where I talk about them, which I will link all of those in the description box. If I am looking down at any point in the video, I have Goodreads pulled up on my phone. I do use Goodreads a lot as far as keeping track of my reading. So if you want to keep track of my reading in real time, then I definitely recommend following me on Goodreads. Alright, let's start with January. I finished 4 books in January. The first book that I finished was Keeper by Kim Chance, which I gave 2 out of 5 stars. Keeper was an e-arc that I received from NetGallery Edelweiss in exchange for an honest review. This is a YA urban fantasy that was a little heavier on the romance than I would have liked. Then I read Hagseed by Margaret Atwood, and I gave that 3 out of 5 stars. This is an adult retelling, I guess. It's a modern retelling of The Tempest, which was kind of bland, to be honest. Next, I read Mistborn: The Final Empire, which is the first book in the first Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is a adult high fantasy with a really amazing magic system. And then last in January, I read Wizard's First Rule, which is the first book in the Sword of Truth series by Terry Goodkind, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And it was also a reread for me. This is an adult high fantasy that was a lot of fun, but also a little campy. Then in February, I read 4 books. The first book I finished was The Last Wish by Andrzej Sapkowski, and that's the first book in the Witcher series that I gave 3 out of 5 stars. This is an adult high fantasy, and it's actually a collection of short stories, and I think because of that, I had a hard time connecting with the characters. Next, I read Dark Matter by Blake Crouch, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult sci-fi thriller, and it was amazing. Next, I finished Jane Unlimited by Kristen Cashore. This is YA. It's kind of hard to put into a genre because it's kind of a genre bender, but I think I would go with urban fantasy. And I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This was a really unique book, and it was sort of like a choose your own adventure book, but the different story paths are all different genres. And then I ended the month with The Crimson Crown by Cinda Williams-Chima, which is the last book in the Shattered Realms series. And I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is a YA high fantasy that is one of my favorite series, and this book wrapped up the series in such a satisfying way, and I absolutely loved it as a series ender. Now moving on to March. I read 5 books in March and I DNF'd 1. So the first book that I finished was The Boy on the Bridge by M.R. Carey, which is the second book in the Girl with All the Gifts duology, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This book is an adult post-apocalyptic fiction, and I think it's a unique story with some really interesting characters. Next, I finished Reign the Earth by A.C. Gauguin, and this is the first book in the Elemente series. Reign the Earth was an e-arc that I received in exchange for an honest review. I would call this a new adult high fantasy because I feel like it has some heavier themes than typical YA books do, but that is one of the things that I loved about it. Next, I had the book that I DNF'd, and that was I Was Anastasia by Ariel Lahan, and I gave that book 2 out of 5 stars, and I read this as an e-arc in exchange for an honest review. While the topic of this book I find to be really interesting and I had high hopes for this, the writing style and structure of the book didn't work for me, and I ended up DNFing it because I was really confused about what was going on. Next, I read Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is a YA high fantasy. Laini Taylor's imagination and lyrical writing did not fail me when it came to this one, and I thought it was amazing. Next, I read All the Beautiful Lies by Peter Swanson, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. All the Beautiful Lies was an e-arc that I received in exchange for an honest review. This is an adult thriller that I found thoroughly entertaining. And then lastly, in March, I read The Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. This is the second book in the Witcher series, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This was, again, a collection of short stories, and as much as I want to love this series, I'm still having trouble connecting with the characters. But I haven't given up, and I hope to read the next book in 2019. And then in the month of April, I read 5 books and had one book that I paused. So I didn't DNF it, but I also stopped reading it. The first book that I finished in April was The Sea of Tranquility by Katja Millay, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This is a YA contemporary romance, and I wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, but at the same time, now in hindsight, I realized that it definitely wasn't a perfect book. The next book that I finished in April was Dreamology by Lucy Keating, which I gave 3 out of 5 stars. This is another YA contemporary romance, which is usually not my cup of tea, and that proved to be true with this book. It was just a little too fluffy for me. Then I started reading The Gone World by Tom Sweaterleash, and this was an e-arc in exchange for an honest review. This is a book that I decided that I didn't want to DNF, but I also didn't want to finish at the moment. It was just a mismatch in moods, but it is a book that I would like to try again in 2019. Next, I finished A Conjuring of Light by V.E. Schwab, which is the third and final book in the Shades of Magic series. This is an adult high fantasy, and I thought it was a really satisfactory finale to the trilogy, and I absolutely loved it. Next, I finished Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, which is the first book in the Legacy of Orisha series, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is a YA high fantasy that is African inspired, and I thought it was really unique and different, but not perfect and didn't quite live up to the hype for me. Next, I finished Unbury Carol by Josh Malerman, which I gave 2 out of 5 stars. And this was an e-arc that I received in exchange for an honest review. Unbury Carol is an adult, I don't even know how to really categorize it. I think it would be like an adult western with a bit of magical realism thrown in. It was a weird one, and I didn't like it. Next, I read Save the Cat by Blake Snyder, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars, and this is a writing craft book that I found to be really informative. Moving on to May, I read 4 books in May. The first book that I finished was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult contemporary about a mixed-race family and some of the things they go through, and I loved it so much. I followed that up by reading Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, which I also gave 5 out of 5 stars. It is also an adult contemporary that deals with families and race and all kinds of themes that I really love exploring and I thought was done fantastically well. Then I finished The Fires of Heaven by Robert Jordan, which is the 5th book in the Wheel of Time series and was a reread for me, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult high fantasy set in my favorite fantasy world. The next book that I finished was The Book of M by Peng Shepherd, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I received this book for free in exchange for an honest review. This is an adult post-apocalyptic book with a dash of magical realism that I found to be really thought-provoking, and I don't think enough people are talking about it. Then in June, I finished 3 books. I read The Fate of the Tierling, which is the third and final book in the Queen of the Tierling trilogy by Eriko Johansson, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is what I'm calling a new adult high fantasy, or at least on the older end of YA. The series as a whole is unique and refreshing. This ending was different. It does have a notorious reputation, and while it didn't ruin the series for me, it still wasn't exactly what I was hoping for. Then I finished Lifelike by Jay Kristoff, which is the first book in the Lifelike series, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And I received an e-arc of this book in exchange for an honest review. This is a YA science fiction book that is full of action and plot twists, and my favorite part is that it's a secret retelling. And then I finished Lord of Chaos by Robert Jordan, which is the 6th book in the Wheel of Time series and was a reread for me, and I gave Lord of Chaos 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult high fantasy with a really epic ending. Then in July, I read 5 books. The first book that I finished was Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young, which I received an e-arc of in exchange for an honest review, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. This is a YA historical fiction, or maybe historical fantasy, that is set in a Viking-inspired world. Next, I finished 7 Eves by Neil Stephenson, which I gave 2 out of 5 stars. This is an adult science fiction book, which was way too long and lacking in character depth. Then I finished Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, which is the 2nd book in the Six of Crows duology, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is a YA high fantasy and was a fantastic ending to a duology that I love. And then I finished A Crown of Swords by Robert Jordan, which is the 7th book in the Wheel of Time series, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult high fantasy, and it was a reread for me, but it actually surprised me with how much I loved it. And then lastly, in July, I read Kill Creek by Scott Thomas, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult horror book that totally blew me away, especially considering it's a debut novel. Next, in August, I finished 3 books. The first one was A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir, and it's the 2nd book in the An Ember in the Ashes series, and I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. This is a YA high fantasy in a world that is Roman-inspired, but my favorite thing about the series so far are the complex characters and their relationships. Next, I finished Pieces of Her by Karen Slaughter. This was an e-arc that I received in exchange for an honest review, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is an adult thriller that I didn't think was super thrilling, but I loved the way that it explored mother-daughter relationships. Then I read The Path of Daggers by Robert Jordan, which is the 8th book in the Wheel of Time series, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This was also a reread, and this is where the series really started to slow down for me. Then in September, I again read only 3 books. The first one I finished was World War Z by Max Brooks, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is an adult post-apocalyptic / horror book, and I really enjoyed it for its unique storytelling, but the way the story is told also impeded me from really connecting with any of the characters. Then I read The Book of Lost Things by John Connolly, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This book is really hard to categorize because while the protagonist is young, I feel like it's written for an older audience, and also it's sort of historical fiction because it's set during World War II, but it's a portal fantasy, so it's fantasy. My favorite part about this book were the dark and twisted versions of fairy tales that we see. And then I finished Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, which is the 9th book in the Wheel of Time series. This was also a reread, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. While this book definitely had some slow parts, there were many redeeming qualities in it, at least for me. And then I had a great reading month in October with 5 books. First, I finished My Plain Jane by the Lady Jamies, which includes Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. This is the 2nd book in a companion series called The Lady Jamies, and I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. My Plain Jane is a YA retelling of Jane Eyre with ghosts and a dash of comedy, but it was a little cheesier than I was anticipating. Next, I finished Our Dark Duet. which is the second book in the Monsters of Verity duology by Victoria Schwab, and I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. Our Dark Duet is a YA dystopian / urban fantasy, and while I find this world fascinating, I didn't love one of the main characters in this book, and it was just alright. Then I read Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is an adult high fantasy set in a wintry landscape with a dark type of fae called the Starric. It has lots of feminist themes, it explores families and traditions, and it has magic in it. I love this book so much. Then I read Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and that is the first book in the Villains duology, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. This is an adult science fiction, urban fantasy. It's about 2 people that gain superpowers, neither of whom are great people. I think they might actually both be sociopaths. Then I read The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I received this book for free in exchange for an honest review. This is a YA horror book. It's actually a Frankenstein retelling, and I love this book for the really complicated character that is Elizabeth Frankenstein. Then I read 4 books in the month of November. The first one that I finished, I read most of in October, but I did finish it in November, and that was Crossroads of Twilight by Robert Jordan, which is the 10th book in the Wheel of Time series. This was also a reread for me. It had some pacing issues, but it ended on a cliffhanger that has me on the edge of my seat to continue the series, which I will finally be doing this month. Then I finished Born a Crime by Trevor Noah, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is a memoir about Trevor Noah's childhood, and it was fascinating, and it was funny, and it made me cry. I loved it. Then I read Saw Kill Girls by Claire Legrand, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is a YA urban fantasy or maybe paranormal book. I always have a hard time differentiating between those 2 genres. I thought this book was unique and refreshing. It felt so different from anything that I've read before. It's atmospheric, it's queer, but also has some horror elements, so if you get scared easily, maybe tread carefully. Then I read The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls, which I gave 5 out of 5 stars. This is another memoir, and it's about Jeanette Walls' life, mostly her childhood and how she grew up very poor, and it's a lot about her relationship with her parents. And now we are in December. I finished a whopping 6 books in December. The first one was New Spring by Robert Jordan, which is a prequel novella to the Wheel of Time series, and I gave 4 out of 5 stars. I did read most of this in November, but I didn't finish it until December. It was a really nice palate cleanser, and it definitely got me reinvigorated and excited to get back into the main series. Then I finished Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is an adult thriller, and it was my first Gillian Flynn book. I really enjoyed it, but I wish that I hadn't seen the movie before I read the book. Then I finished The Final Descent by Rick Yancey, which is the last book in the Monstermologist series. While the series starts out as middle grade, this last one is definitely YA, so this is a YA horror book. While I love this world and the characters in the series, I feel like this last book didn't do the series justice, and I spent most of my time being confused. Then I read Landline by Rainbow Rowell, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is an adult contemporary romance with a dash of magic, and I thought it was really fun and perfect for reading at Christmas time because it takes place over Christmas. Then I read The Well of Ascension by Brandon Sanderson, which is the second book in the First Era Mistborn series. This is an adult high fantasy. This book absolutely blew my mind. The twists at the end of this book were crazy, and I just started the 3rd and final book in this first trilogy today. I have an audiobook of it, so I couldn't put it here. And then finally, my final book of 2018 was Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is an adult post-apocalyptic book that has like a literary fiction feel to it. While I really enjoyed this book and the themes it explored, the ending was a bit of a letdown. Alright guys, there you have it. Those are all of the books that I read in 2018. Like I said, I'll have all of my monthly wrap-ups linked down below, so you can go and find more of my thoughts on any of these books that you're interested in. This is just the first in my end-of-year wrap-up videos that I have coming. I have a lot coming, so I hope you guys enjoy these videos as much as I do. This is my favorite time of year when it comes to booktube. I get so obsessed with watching everybody's end of year videos. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like bookish content. I post 1 to 2 times a week. That is all I have for now. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye. Hi. Lay down. Lay down. Lay down. You're in my shot. The second book, and this is the first book in the and I had to DNF it because I ended up DNFing it because I was this is an adult and this was an e-arc that and this was an I think you know, it's YA with some more mature themes, which is how I like my YA because I'm a more mature person. And it was my first alien fun. Bye.